What motivates a billionaire's son to trade luxury for hours comforting families in a migrant camp? Barron Trump's secret visit left residents and onlookers in disbelief, hinting at a transformative experience. As word spread, anticipation filled the air. Not a dry eye in sight, one witness would later recall. But it was Barron's unexpected act of kindness towards one struggling family that truly set the stage for a story that would redefine perceptions of the Trump name. The weight of the moment hung heavy, promising revelations that would challenge everything people thought they knew about this famous family. The sun had barely risen when Barron Trump slipped out of a Manhattan high-rise and into a waiting van, his movements quick and purposeful. As the vehicle pulled away, the enormity of what he was about to do pressed down on him. The van wound through the awakening city, each turn taking Barron further from the life he knew. Memories flooded his mind, snippets of overheard conversations at lavish dinners, voices dripping with disdain when discussing those people at the border. A nagging discomfort had always accompanied these words. As the concrete jungle gave way to open spaces, Barron's anxiety grew. He'd planned this trip in secret, knowing discovery could derail everything. His pulse quickened at the thought of recognition, beads of sweat forming on his brow as he imagined the consequences. Hours passed, marked by changing scenery outside tinted windows. Barron's thoughts drifted to the supplies he'd packed. Books, toys, and necessities gathered over weeks. He hoped they would be enough, though he knew nothing could truly suffice for what these families were enduring. The van slowed, and reality hit Barron full force. Before him stretched rows of makeshift shelters, a stark contrast to his opulent world. The air was thick with dust and desperation. Voices carried on the breeze, some in unfamiliar languages, others in English tinged with fear. A guard approached, his steps measured. Barron tensed, preparing for recognition. The guard's eyes widened slightly, but then his expression softened. With a subtle nod, he gestured for Barron to proceed. Relief washed over Barron as he entered the camp. Children played in the dirt, their laughter contrasting with the worry on their parents' faces. Makeshift classrooms buzzed with volunteer teachers. Everywhere, Barron saw evidence of lives interrupted and hope struggling to survive. A small group of children noticed him, their games pausing. One little girl, no more than 6, stepped forward. "Did you bring books?" she whispered. Barron's throat tightened. He nodded, kneeling to her level and reaching for his backpack. As he did, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about politics or family legacies anymore. It was about human connection, about bridging the vast divide between worlds that should never have been separated in the first place. As the soccer ball rolled to a stop at Barron's feet, time seemed to pause. The carefully rehearsed greetings vanished from his mind as he met the wary eyes of the children who had halted their game. The camp around him held its breath, the dusty air heavy with unspoken questions. Barron's presence rippled through the makeshift shelters. Whispers darted from person to person on the warm breeze. Adults emerged, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Some held their children close, while others stood with arms crossed, forming an invisible barrier. The young man's crisp attire contrasted sharply with the camp's weathered inhabitants. He felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him, threatening to crush his fragile hope. For a moment he considered retreating, questioning whether his presence would do more harm than good. But then his gaze fell once more to the soccer ball. It was scuffed and patched, yet it represented a universal language of connection. With a deep breath, Barron gently tapped the ball, sending it rolling back towards the children. The simple action hung in the air. A tentative olive branch extended across the divide. A young boy, no more than 10, stepped forward. His eyes darted between Barron and the ball, weighing the situation. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "You play?" he called out in accented English. The invitation felt monumental. Barron nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I'd love to," he replied, his voice carrying a mix of relief and excitement. What followed was nothing short of transformative. Barron joined the impromptu match, his first attempts at dribbling eliciting giggles. As he continued to play, his movements loosened, and the laughter evolved from amusement at his awkwardness to shared joy. The game swelled to a dozen players, with Barron finding himself breathless, but lighter than he'd felt in years. He marveled at the children's skill, their grace and agility speaking of countless hours of practice despite their circumstances. As the game progressed, the camp's initial wariness began to soften. Adults drew closer, their expressions shifting from suspicion to cautious amusement. Some called out encouragement. momentarily forgetting the presence of the outsider in their midst. In one memorable moment, Barron's ambitious kick sent the ball soaring over its target, landing with a splash in a nearby puddle. The resulting spray caught both Barron and several children, leaving them speckled and shocked. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Then, led by the boy who had first invited Barron to play, peals of laughter erupted, spreading through the onlookers until the entire area rang with mirth. As Barron wiped mud from his face, still chuckling, he caught sight of an older man watching from the edge of the group. The man's weathered face bore the lines of hardship, but his eyes twinkled with something akin to approval. He gave Barron a small nod, a gesture that spoke volumes. The soccer game continued, with players rotating in and out. Barron found himself relaxing, the stiffness of his earlier anxiety melting away. He began to see beyond labels, instead recognizing individuals with hopes, dreams, and a resilience that humbled him. As the laughter from the soccer game faded, a new tension filled the air. The children's curious faces turned toward Barron, their eyes wide with anticipation. He reached for the large duffel bag he had brought with him, its contents a mystery to the onlookers. The atmosphere shifted, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty rippling through the crowd. Barron's hands trembled slightly as he unzipped the bag, acutely aware of the scrutiny he was under. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This moment, he knew, could make or break the fragile connection he had begun to forge with the camp's residents. As he reached into the bag, a collective gasp rose from the gathered crowd. Out came books with colorful covers, art supplies in every hue imaginable, and small toys carefully chosen to spark joy and imagination. The items emerged like seeds of hope, ready to take root in the barren soil of the camp. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, stood at the front of the group. Her eyes widened as Barron knelt down, holding out a pristine sketch pad and a set of colored pencils. For a moment, she hesitated, then slowly reached out and took them, clutching the items to her chest as if they were the most precious things in the world. The joy that bloomed on her face was palpable, lighting up her eyes and spreading into a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire camp. Barron felt a lump form in his throat, realizing the impact of this simple gesture. It wasn't just about the physical items, it was about the hope and possibility they represented. As he continued distributing the gifts, the atmosphere transformed. The initial wariness melted away, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and shared excitement. Children who had been shy now approached with smiles, their hands outstretched. Parents drew closer, their expressions softening. A mother approached, her eyes brimming with tears as she held a bilingual picture book. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. This means more than you know." Barron understood that these gifts were lifelines, connections to a world beyond the camp's boundaries. As the last of the gifts were handed out, Barron observed the scene before him. The camp, which had seemed so bleak upon his arrival, now buzzed with new energy. Children sat in small groups, poring over books or collaborating on art projects. Parents watched with smiles, some joining in to read stories aloud or admire their children's creations. In this moment, Barron grasped the true power of these simple gestures. It wasn't about the monetary value of the gifts or even their practical use. It was about the message they conveyed. You are seen, you are valued, you have potential. The gifts were tokens of hope, reminders that the world beyond the camp's boundaries had not forgotten them. As he watched a group of children excitedly discussing the characters in their new books, Barron felt a profound shift within himself. The nervousness and uncertainty that had plagued him at the beginning of this visit were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. He had come thinking he would be the one giving something to these people, but now he understood that they had given him something invaluable in return: perspective, empathy, and a deeper understanding of the human spirit's resilience. The aroma of simmering spices and cooking rice wafted through the air, drawing Barron towards the heart of the camp. As he approached the communal area, memories of the playful soccer game lingered, a reminder of the unexpected connections he'd already forged. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes gestured for him to join her family. Barron hesitated, acutely aware of the vast gulf between their worlds. As the meal progressed, more residents drifted over. Soon, a small crowd had gathered, each adding their own thread to the tapestry of stories being woven. Barron found himself captivated by tales of home countries he'd only read about in textbooks, of journeys across landscapes he could scarcely imagine. An elderly man, his face etched with lines of hardship and wisdom, spoke of the village he left behind in Honduras. "We had so little," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but we had each other. Here, we are trying to build that same sense of community." As Barron listened, he began to see the camp through new eyes. What had initially appeared as a collection of makeshift shelters now revealed itself as a complex ecosystem of human resilience. He noticed the small touches that made each dwelling a home: a colorful scarf hung as a curtain, a tiny garden of herbs growing in a repurposed container. The conversation flowed freely now, punctuated by laughter and moments of shared understanding. Barron found himself opening up, sharing stories of his own life that he'd never voiced before. He spoke of the pressure of growing up in the public eye, of the expectations placed upon him, and of his own uncertainties about the future. To his surprise, he found empathy in the faces around him. A teenage boy nodded when Barron mentioned feeling like he was living in someone else's shadow. "I understand," the boy said. "Here, we all carry the weight of our family's hopes." As the meal ended, Barron realized something had fundamentally shifted. The initial wariness had disappeared, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the food they'd shared. He was no longer seen as an outsider, but a fellow human with his own stories and struggles. The shared meal had become a bridge, connecting him to the humanity he had come to find. As he helped clear the dishes, Barron felt a sense of belonging he hadn't anticipated. The simple act of breaking bread together had done more to dissolve barriers than any grand gesture could have. As twilight descended on the camp, Barron felt the weight of the day's experiences settling in his chest. The vibrant energy of the afternoon had given way to a quieter, more reflective atmosphere. He stood near the edge of the camp, his eyes scanning the rows of tents bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. The time had come for him to leave, yet something held him back, a nagging feeling that his journey wasn't quite complete. A sudden commotion near the medical tent caught his attention. Voices rose in urgency, cutting through the evening calm. Barron's feet carried him toward the source of the disturbance before his mind could fully process what was happening. As he approached, the scene unfolded before him like a painting coming to life in the fading light. A family huddled around a small cot, their faces etched with worry and fear. At the center of their vigil lay a young boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, his small frame shaking with fever. The camp's medic, fatigue deepening the lines on her face, shook her head softly. "We've used the last of our fever reducers. There's nothing more we can do tonight except try to keep him cool and comfortable." The words hit Barron like a physical blow. In that moment, the stark reality of his privilege crashed over him. He could easily summon help, but such an action would shatter the delicate anonymity he had maintained, potentially ending his mission and drawing unwanted attention to the camp and its vulnerable residents. The boy's labored breathing filled the tent, each rattling inhale like the ticking of a relentless clock. Barron's mind raced, weighing the consequences of his choices against the urgent need before him. The family's love and fear, so raw and visible, tugged at something deep within him. Without a word, Barron moved to the side of the cot and lowered himself to the ground. He reached out, taking the boy's small hand in his own. The child's fingers were hot to the touch, but they curled instinctively around Barron's, seeking comfort. "I'll stay," he said simply, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. His decision felt like an anchor in turbulent waters, grounding not only himself but the entire room in a shared purpose. As the night deepened, Barron remained by the boy's side. He helped change cool cloths, spoke softly to the parents, and entertained the siblings with quiet stories. The hours stretched on, marked by the steady rhythm of the child's breathing and the whispered conversations of those keeping watch. In the darkest hours before dawn, when hope seemed to waver, Barron found himself humming a lullaby from his childhood. The melody, soft and comforting, floated through the tent. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boy's fever began to break. His breathing eased, and color returned to his cheeks. As the first light of morning painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Barron watched the family's relief and joy unfold. The boy's eyes fluttered open, clear and bright for the first time in hours. His mother wept silently, her tears of fear replaced by those of gratitude. The father clasped Barron's shoulder, unable to find words to express his thanks. In that moment, as exhaustion and emotion threatened to overwhelm him, Barron realized something profound. This night, this simple act of being present, meant more than any grand gesture or expensive gift ever could. He had shared in their vigil, offered comfort through the long hours of uncertainty, and emerged on the other side changed. As the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, Barron Trump remained at the young boy's bedside. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but a newfound lightness filled his spirit. The night had been long, filled with whispered prayers and gentle reassurances, but as morning broke, so did the fever that had gripped the child. A single tear traced its way down Barron's cheek as he gazed at the peaceful face of the sleeping boy, knowing that no designer outfit could ever make him feel as worthy as he did in that moment. The camp stirred to life, whispers of Barron's vigil spreading like a gentle breeze. The initial wariness that had greeted his arrival melted away, replaced by a palpable shift in the air. Mothers' eyes softened as they passed, and weathered men offered silent nods of acknowledgement. In the span of a night, Barron had transformed from an outsider to something more, a young man who had proven his character through selfless action. As he prepared to leave, the reality of returning to his world settled over Barron like a heavy cloak. The thought of leaving behind the connections he had forged, the trust he had earned, felt like a physical ache in his chest. He found himself lingering, reluctant to step back across the invisible line that separated their worlds. The camp residents gathered around him, their faces a mosaic of emotions. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and they parted to allow a small figure to step forward. A young girl, no more than 8 or 9, approached with dark eyes fixed intently on Barron. In her hands, she held something small and colorful. She offered him a simple bracelet woven from threads of vibrant blues and greens. The colors reminded Barron of the ocean, of freedom and possibility. With trembling hands, he accepted the gift, his eyes welling with tears at the profound simplicity of the gesture. This wasn't an expensive token or a grand gesture. It was something far more valuable. It was acceptance, gratitude, and hope, all intertwined in a band that could encircle his wrist. As the weight of the bracelet settled against his skin, Barron felt a seismic shift within himself. The threads weren't just fabric, they were connections, tying him irrevocably to the people he had met, the stories he had heard, and the struggles he had witnessed. He looked around at the faces watching him, seeing not strangers or statistics, but individuals with dreams, fears, and unbreakable spirits. His heart pounding with the magnitude of his decision, Barron made a silent vow. He would use his privilege, his voice, and his position to advocate for those he had met. No longer would he stand silently in the background, allowing others to shape the narrative. He had found his purpose, discovered a strength he never knew he possessed, and he was determined to make it count. As Barron took his first steps away from the camp, he felt the eyes of its residents upon him. But he was no longer just the son of a billionaire, a curiosity to be observed from a distance. He was a young man awakened, his eyes opened to realities he could no longer ignore. The camp watched him go, knowing they had witnessed something remarkable, the birth of an unexpected ally, someone who could bridge the vast gulf between their worlds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Barron Trump stood at the camp's edge, the weight of his experiences settling in his chest. The faces he had come to know, etched with struggle yet alight with dignity, blurred in the fading light. In this makeshift community, he had found more than a charitable cause. He had discovered a transformative journey. Barron's polished exterior had given way to a profound connection with those he'd met. Their stories, their unwavering spirit, had reshaped his worldview. As he turned to leave, a silent vow formed in his heart: to carry these experiences beyond the camp's borders, to use his voice for those who had touched him so deeply. What acts of kindness, he wondered, might change the world?